The ship Kindred was never meant for war nor for rushing. She was built for the long in-between, the stretches of space where silence collected in folds and starlight became a companion rather than a backdrop. From a distance, she looked modest, a spindle-shaped exploration vessel barely longer than a city block. She had no dramatic wings or bristling armaments. Instead, her designers favored curves, pale composite plating, and windows wider than they strictly needed to be. The philosophy was simple. Explorers should be able to look outward and feel at home, rather than encased in a fortress. Captain Naima Vey sat in the forward lounge, a mug cradled between her palms. It was early by the ship's artificial cycle, just before the rest of the crew began stirring. She preferred this quiet hour. The lounge's panoramic glass stretched above her like the roof of a cathedral, revealing the nebula ahead. It shimmered with slow color, lavender folds of gas, veins of emerald dust, and the occasional glitter of embedded stars. "Looks like someone painted it," said a voice behind her. Naima smiled without turning. "You're up early, Juno." Juno Mia, the ship's botanist, shuffled in barefoot, clutching a blanket around her shoulders. She had a talent for finding the cozy corners of any environment, whether that was a greenhouse or a hard metal bench. She joined Naima at the window and let the blanket pool at her lap. "It doesn't look real," Juno murmured. "Like a storybook sky." "Real enough," Naima said. "Our charts say this nebula's barely been surveyed. Probably no one's taken the time to just sit and look." Juno tilted her head against the glass, as if hoping to feel its warmth. "Feels like it's welcoming us." Naima sipped her tea but didn't answer. She had learned long ago that Juno's instincts, strange as they sometimes sounded, were worth listening to. By the time the rest of the crew gathered in the galley, the Kindred felt awake in its slow way. The hum of recyclers, the scent of brewed coffee, the shuffle of socks on the deck plates, it was not so different from a household kitchen if one ignored the stars outside. There were 6 of them in total: Naima Vey, captain, calm and deliberate; Juno Mia, botanist, whose greenhouse was her sanctuary; Arlen Carr's engineer, eternally fixing something no one else thought broken; Dr. Elira Thorne, linguist and cultural historian, always scribbling notes on her tablet; Tavi Solano, pilot, who treated every corridor like a racetrack; Dr. Mikkel Aura, physician, quiet, always brewing some herbal concoction. It was not a large crew, but that was the point. Exploration missions worked best when they felt more like families than teams. Breakfast unfolded with the usual rhythm. Tavi complained about the nutrient loaf, Arlen bragged about his latest minor adjustment to the ship's thermal regulators, and Juno tried to convince everyone to try a jam she'd fermented from greenhouse berries. Elira was the first to shift the topic. She cleared her throat gently, waiting for the lull. "Captain, I've been going through the long-range scans. There's something in there." The table quieted. Naima leaned forward, define something. Elira tapped her tablet and projected a holographic image into the air above the table. It was blurry, distorted by the nebula's density, but there was no mistaking the lines, a structure, not jagged like rock, not shapeless like dust, but deliberate. "A station," Arlen guessed. "Too large for that," Elira said softly, "and the material signature doesn't match anything we know." The hologram rotated slowly, showing sweeping arches, crystalline towers, vast hollow spaces. Even blurry, it radiated intent. "Artificial," Naima said, "not a question." Elira nodded. "Almost certainly, which means, Juno interrupted, voice hushed with awe, "we're not the first ones here." The Kindred glided deeper into the nebula. The outside light grew stranger as they approached, filtering through denser clouds. Sometimes the colors were soft, pink drifting into ivory. Other times, sudden streaks of cobalt split the view, scattering the starlight like a prism. Inside the lounge, the crew gathered more often than usual, drawn to the windows. The closer they came, the clearer the structure appeared. It was not a ruin in the usual sense, no jagged collapse or debris field. Instead, it resembled a sleeping colossus, intact but hushed, waiting. Vast crystal pylons stretched like frozen waterfalls, their surfaces glinting with pale fire. Bridges connected them in elegant arcs. Entire courtyards, if that was the right word, hung suspended in open space, latticed with geometric patterns. Tavi whistled low. Looks like a palace for giants. Illyra shook her head. Not giants, just different thinkers. This is art as much as architecture. Juno pressed her palms against the glass. It doesn't feel abandoned. Naima heard the words and felt an echo of them in her chest. Something about the place radiated not menace, but invitation, like a door left ajar and a fire left glowing inside. She stood. Prepare docking protocols. We'll approach slow. The moment the airlock sealed against one of the crystalline platforms, a hush fell over the crew. The external cameras displayed their landing site, a wide terrace, its surface smooth as polished stone, etched with lines that pulsed faintly as though alive. They suited up, not in heavy armor but in the lightweight exploration suits, comfortable, flexible, more like extended clothing than shells. Helmets retracted with a tap, in case the air proved breathable. Naima was first to step out. Her boots touched the terrace and made the faintest chime, like crystal struck by glass. She drew a slow breath. The air inside her helmet registered as clean, oxygen-rich, even faintly floral. She lifted the helmet back, and the scent enveloped her, cool, sweet, reminiscent of jasmine mixed with rain. "It's safe," she called softly. One by one, the others followed. Together they stood on the terrace, gazing outward. The nebula stretched on all sides, veils of color flowing silently. Above them rose the crystalline pylons, so tall they vanished into mist. Between them, faint motes of light drifted like fireflies. Juno reached out to touch the terrace. The etched lines flared gently beneath her hand, responding like ripples on water. Arlen exhaled a low whistle. "This place is alive, or remembers how to be," Illyra said. Naima simply looked around and felt the strangest sensation, that she had stepped not into an alien ruin, but into a kind of home she'd never known she missed. They did not explore far that first day. Instead, they made camp directly on the terrace, setting up portable lights and a temporary shelter. It wasn't necessity, the air was safe, the surface stable, but rather ritual. Explorers always began with a base, a hearthstone from which to fan outward. That evening, they sat in a circle outside the shelter, their lights dimmed to let the natural glow of the place seep in. Mikkel passed around steaming mugs from a thermos, some herbal brew that tasted faintly of mint and honey. Conversation was quiet, not hushed by fear but by reverence. They spoke of small things, Juno's plants, Arlen's ongoing quest to tune the recycler's hum into a perfect chord, Tavi's insistence that the nebula colors reminded him of childhood beaches. Above them, the crystalline towers shimmered faintly, as though listening. Naima leaned back, warmth of the mug in her hands, and allowed herself the rarest luxury for a captain on a mission, the sense that, for this moment, there was nowhere else in the galaxy they needed to be. And though no one spoke it aloud, each of them felt it, the unmistakable impression that the place had been waiting for them, not as intruders, not as conquerors, but as guests, as family. The first steps inside the structure were taken with the kind of caution one reserves for libraries or temples, not battlefields. A wide arch opened from the terrace into what looked like a corridor, though the word felt too utilitarian for what they entered. The walls were tall, curving smoothly into vaulted ceilings that sparkled with embedded facets. Every surface seemed both mineral and crafted, crystal that had been coaxed into deliberate form, like a sculpture grown rather than carved. The light was strange. There were no visible lamps, no panels, yet the walls glowed faintly, suffusing the air with a steady dawn-like radiance. It was neither cold nor harsh, but warm, the kind of glow one might associate with lanterns during a snowstorm. "It feels soft," Juno whispered. Her voice carried strangely, not echoing but deepening, as though the space absorbed sound and returned it in gentler form. Mikkel bent to touch the floor. "Not dust, no decay, it's like it was made yesterday." "Or like it never ages," Illyra murmured. She was already scribbling, her stylus scratching faintly against her tablet. "A preservation beyond time." They walked slowly, letting their footsteps set the rhythm. The corridor opened into a hall. It was vast, wide enough to fit a dozen ships side by side, and it stretched upward until mist obscured the ceiling. Columns rose like frozen waterfalls, their surfaces flowing with lines of light that pulsed faintly as though breathing. Suspended between them were moats, tiny glowing spheres that drifted lazily like dandelion seeds caught in perpetual stillness. When Juno reached toward one, it bobbed closer, hovering at her palm before floating away again. Arlen's voice was a whisper of awe. A whole city could gather here. Naima said nothing. She was looking at the floor. The surface was patterned with concentric rings, like ripples frozen mid-wave. At the center lay a raised dais, smooth and gleaming. Something about it reminded her of a hearth, an empty place meant to contain warmth. She approached slowly, the others following. The dais responded. As her foot touched its edge, the lines on its surface brightened, then rippled outward, carrying light through the rings like waves spreading across a pond. The moats above stirred, shifting into patterns, arranging themselves into slow spirals. Juno gasped, "It's alive." Illyra frowned thoughtfully. Not alive, responsive, like a welcome. They lingered in the hall for hours, not in frantic exploration, but in quiet presence. Each of them moved differently through the space. Juno knelt near the columns, studying the glowing veins with a botanist's patience, as if they were stems carrying sap. She murmured occasionally, jotting sketches of branching patterns. Arlen ran a scanner over the walls, but eventually he gave up, muttering that no data could capture the experience of standing there. He ended up lying flat on his back in the center, staring upward, grinning like a child at the drifting moats. Mikkels set up a small stove on the dais's edge, heating water, as if the hall itself were merely another living room. When the tea was ready, he poured it into cups and handed them around, the steam curling in the faint light. Illyra walked in slow circles, recording every detail, her voice low as she dictated. But at times she simply stopped, stylus hovering, as though words failed her. And Tavi, restless as ever, jogged along the hall's length, then doubled back, his laughter echoing faintly as he skidded around corners. "It's like this place was made for movement," he declared, out of breath but glowing. Naima, meanwhile, stood at the dais with her mug in hand, watching her crew inhabit the space as naturally as if they belonged there. That more than the architecture struck her deepest, how quickly the hall transformed from alien to familiar, as though it had been designed to become home at the first touch of companionship. Later, as they gathered again on the terrace, Illyra shared her early thoughts. "It's not random, none of it. These rings, the dais, even the hall's acoustics, they're arranged for gathering, not solitude. Whoever built this wasn't designing a fortress or laboratory, they were designing a place to come together." "Like a village square?" Arlen asked. Illyra nodded. "Or a hearth?" The word lingered in the air, carrying warmth with it. Juno smiled faintly. "Then maybe we're not intruding. Maybe we're just sitting down by the fire." That night, the Kindred's crew slept in their shelter on the terrace, though not all found rest easily. Naima lay awake for a long time, watching the crystalline towers shimmer under the nebula's light. She thought of Earth, her grandmother's hearth in the mountain village, where winters stretched long and nights were cold. She remembered the way the fire gathered everyone, how stories grew in its glow. This place felt like that, and though it was impossible, she could not shake the feeling that it wanted them to remember it. As her eyes closed at last, she thought she heard something soft, like the faint crackle of embers or the sigh of a distant voice woven into the quiet. The next morning began with a kind of eagerness unusual for an expedition crew. Normally, first steps into alien ruins were taken with meticulous planning and layers of caution. But here, the atmosphere itself seemed to coax them forward, as though the structure wanted them to wander. They packed light, scanners slung lazily at their hips, mugs of Mikkels' herbal brew carried almost as ritual, not necessity. Their helmets stayed clipped to their belts rather than sealed over their heads. The nebula light spilled into the crystalline halls, guiding their way with a natural glow. Juno led this time. She had been restless all night, talking in half-sleep about patterns she'd seen on the walls. Her instincts carried them through branching corridors, past arches carved like rippling water, until they reached a threshold unlike the others. Here, the air was different, humid, scented faintly of earth after rain. When the door slid open, if it could be called a door, for it had no seam or hinge, but instead unfolded like petals, they found themselves staring into a vast chamber filled with life. It was a garden, though no human hand had planted it. Translucent leaves stretched broad as sails, their veins glowing faintly blue. Vines draped from high terraces, trailing motes of light that pulsed like slow heartbeats. Pools of liquid shimmered with iridescence, their surfaces stirred not by breeze, but by some inner rhythm. And the colors, oh, the colors! Greens that shifted toward turquoise, blossoms that glowed peach and rose, mosses that shone like embers scattered across the floor. The crew froze at the threshold, awash in the sight. "It's alive," Juno whispered, her voice breaking. "It's all alive." She stepped forward, her boots sinking slightly into soft moss. The glow spread beneath her feet, rippling outward as though greeting her. She dropped to her knees, touching the surface with reverence. Mikkel scanned the air, breathable, not just safe, it's rich. Cleaner than anything we've got on the ship. He drew his helmet back fully and inhaled deeply. Feels like a forest after storm. Arlen was already climbing onto one of the terraces, laughing under his breath. "It's warm here, radiant, like the walls are keeping the chill out." Naima followed slower, her eyes drawn upward. The ceiling was not a ceiling at all, but a dome of crystal so thin it let the nebula's light pour through, diffused into soft rays. It gave the illusion of a sky strange and beautiful, yet oddly comforting. Illyra recorded everything with trembling hands. This changes everything. If they cultivated gardens, they weren't only builders of stone and crystal. They lived, they breathed. They needed comfort. "Like us," Tavi said simply. He was already sprawled on a glowing moss patch, arms folded behind his head, grinning like a boy in summer grass. "I could nap here forever." They lingered in the garden far longer than planned. Juno wandered like a pilgrim, sketching leaves, collecting samples in gentle hands. The plants responded to her touch, opening blossoms, brightening their glow. She laughed more in those hours than she had in months aboard the Kindred. Arlen discovered that the vines along the terraces produced a faint, harmonic hum when plucked, like harp strings woven of light. He strummed them experimentally, creating soft chords that resonated through the chamber. The sound was not loud but full, wrapping around them like a lullaby. Mikkel, of course, found a way to brew tea. He collected a few blossoms that fell naturally from a vine, steeped them in hot water, and passed the cups around. The flavor was unlike anything they'd known, sweet, with a grounding warmth that spread slowly through their chests. Naima sipped hers last, savoring. The tea made her feel not just nourished but held, as if the garden itself had offered her a seat by its fire. Illyra, ever the scholar, finally lowered her tablet. "Do you feel it?" she asked softly. "Feel what?" Naima said. Illyra's eyes shimmered in the glow. "That this was meant for us, or for someone like us. This isn't just survival, this is hospitality." When they finally returned to the terrace camp, hours later, their steps were slower, reluctant. The crystalline halls outside felt colder by comparison, as though the warmth of the garden had clung to them. That night, they sat close together around Mikkel's stove, silent more often than speaking. No one needed to name it, but the thought was there in each of their minds. They had discovered many things in their careers as explorers, ruins, artifacts, dead civilizations. But this was the first time they had found something that felt alive in its welcome. And as the nebula shimmered beyond the crystalline towers, Naima thought once more of her grandmother's hearth, of winters spent with family by the fire. The feeling was the same, not just discovery, belonging. They might have stayed in the garden for days, if not for curiosity tugging them onward. After a night's rest on the terrace, rest deeper than any they had known aboard the Kindred, The crew gathered with a quiet understanding. The garden was not the end, only a beginning. It was Juno who noticed the pathway first. A narrow arch at the far side of the garden, half veiled by trailing vines, pulsed faintly with light when she drew near. Unlike the grand corridors, this one was intimate, lined with soft glowing veins that curled like script. Naima studied the arch, then the faces of her crew. Each looked as though they had been waiting for her to say the words. She smiled faintly. Let's see where it leads. The corridor wound gently, not in straight lines, but in flowing curves, like a river through stone. The glow along the walls brightened as they walked, responding to their pace, until they emerged into a chamber that stilled even Tavi's restless energy. It was vast, yes, but not in the awe-striking way of the first hall. This was a different kind of vastness, soft, hushed, like stepping into a great library at midnight. The walls curved upward into domes, each surface inlaid with crystalline facets arranged in flowing patterns. But the true marvel floated in the air, threads of light weaving slowly from point to point, forming shifting images that dissolved and reformed. At first, they were abstract, spirals, lattices, waves of color. Then, as the crew watched, the threads wove together into a clearer image, a figure, tall and slender, unlike any human, not detailed, not solid, but gestured into being by lines of light. The figure raised its hands, and around it appeared shapes, other figures, gathered in circles, their outlines flickering like flames. Juno inhaled sharply. They're showing us. Showing us what? Arlen asked, his voice low. Illyra stepped forward, eyes wide, her stylus forgotten. Memory. The images flowed one into another, figures gathering in vast halls, much like the one the crew had found. Gardens blooming under nebulous skies. Children, if that word applied, chasing motes of light that darted like fireflies. There was no sound, only the hum of the chamber itself, but the meaning pressed close nonetheless. These were not just records, they were remembrances, not cold archives, but memories shared as though by a storyteller at a fireside. Illyra whispered as she scribbled at last, not history for preservation, history for belonging. They wanted whoever found this to feel the warmth of their lives. Mikkel's eyes softened, like stories told before bed. The crew stood scattered across the chamber, each caught by different threads of light. Arlen reached toward one, and it swirled around his hand, shifting into an image of tools, hands shaping crystal. Juno touched another, and it blossomed into a vision of vines unfurling, blossoms opening toward nebula light. Naima remained still, her gaze drawn to a cluster near the chamber's center. The threads there moved slower, pulsing deep gold. When she stepped closer, they shaped themselves into a hearth. Not fire, there was no flame, but a crystalline basin glowing warmly, surrounded by figures sitting close together. The sight was so familiar it ached. She could almost hear her grandmother's voice, could almost feel the heat of a winter fire. And in that moment she understood, the hall was not only memory, it was invitation. They stayed for hours, wandering the chamber like children through an elder's tale. Some memories repeated, others shifted subtly, as though responsive to their presence. When they sat on the chamber's floor together, the lights above reformed into a single circle of figures, mirroring them. Juno leaned her head against Illyra's shoulder, eyes damp. They wanted us to feel what they felt. Illyra touched her stylus to her lips, as though silenced by reverence. They wanted us to know we are not alone. For once, Arlen had no joke. He sat cross-legged, eyes tilted upward, as still as stone. Even Tavi, restless always, seemed rooted. Feels like they're sitting with us, he murmured. Naima closed her eyes briefly, letting the warmth seep in. She knew exploration often led to discovery, sometimes to wonder, sometimes to grief. But never before had she found a place that felt so clearly designed not to warn or boast, but to welcome. As they rose at last to leave, the threads of light shifted one more time. They flowed together, forming a simple image, an open arch, and beyond it a glow like sunrise, the way forward. That night, back at their terrace camp, silence wrapped them. Not uncomfortable, not heavy, but the silence of people holding something sacred inside. Naima sat apart a little, her mug warm in her hands. She looked at her crew, her family, and thought, we are no longer just explorers charting a nebula. We are guests, seated at a hearth older than memory. And though no one said it aloud, each of them felt the same. They were being told a story. And the story was only beginning. The arch the memory hall had shown them was not difficult to find. The crystalline corridors seemed to lean toward it, as though guiding the crew with subtle shifts of light. Their footsteps echoed softly, blending with a faint hum that grew clearer the farther they walked. The hum was not mechanical. It was harmonic, resonant, like the vibration of a tuning fork held just at the edge of hearing. It's music, Juno whispered. Arlen tilted his head. Or something like it, not random. Naima slowed her pace, letting the sound wash over them. The corridor opened at last into a chamber so wide that its far edges blurred into mist. Unlike the halls before, this one was shaped like a bowl, descending in tiers toward a central platform. The walls were lined with facets that glowed faintly in shifting colors, and every time the harmonic hum rose, the walls brightened as though resonating in sympathy. A theater, Illyra breathed. No, Mikkel corrected gently, a place of listening. They descended carefully, footsteps ringing faintly against the tiers. The central platform was smooth, crystalline, its surface etched with concentric spirals. From above, it looked like the ripples of a drop falling into water. As Naima stepped onto it, the hum shifted. It deepened, grew warmer, spreading through her chest like the resonance of a drum. She felt it not only in her ears, but in her bones. The others joined, one by one, and with each arrival the resonance changed, new tones weaving into the harmony until the chamber was alive with sound. Juno clutched her chest, eyes wide. It's responding to us. Arlen laughed softly, astonished. We are part of the instrument. They experimented cautiously at first. When Juno hummed under her breath, the chamber caught her tone, amplified it, spun it into a shimmering chord that floated upward. Arlen, grinning, whistled a short phrase. The walls caught it, twisted it, returned it layered with harmonies until it sounded like a choir. Tavi, always daring, clapped his hands in rhythm. The chamber answered with a pulse of light along the walls, keeping beat as though percussion had always been part of its design. Mikkel added his voice low and steady, and Illyra followed with a wavering note. Together, they wove a melody without planning it, each sound folded into the chamber's embrace, transformed into something vast and luminous. Naima remained silent longest, simply listening. The music wrapped around her like a tide, rising and falling. Finally, she let out a single note, steady, calm, and the chamber blossomed with light, brighter than before. They froze, awed. It knows us, Illyra whispered. It's not just repeating, it's listening. For hours they played, not with instruments, but with themselves, their voices, their rhythms, their laughter. The chamber answered every sound, building it into harmonies that no single being could create alone. Juno danced, spinning with arms outstretched, her footsteps triggering ripples of light across the platform. Tavi joined her, stumbling at first, then laughing until he fell flat on the floor, the chamber echoing his laughter with a cascade of chimes. Mikkel brewed tea again, because of course he did, and the steam rose like incense into the glowing air. Even the hiss of his kettle was caught by the chamber and softened into melody. Arlen, lying on his back at the center of the platform, sighed with a contentment Naima had never heard from him before. I could stay here forever. Naima said nothing. She was watching her crew, their joy reflected in the chamber's living harmony. She thought of how rare this was, exploration without fear, discovery without loss. It felt like a gift given freely. And in her chest, the resonance of the chamber lingered, as though it had recognized her voice, her note, and woven it into its eternal song. When at last they left, the harmony did not vanish. It softened, faded gently like the last chord of a lullaby. The walls dimmed but did not darken, as if holding the memory of their song in readiness for another visit. As they stepped back into the corridor, Juno's eyes shone. That wasn't just music. That was belonging. Illyra nodded slowly. They built a place where everyone's voice matters, where harmony is only possible together. Naima let the words settle. She knew Elira was right. This place was not showing them weapons, nor warnings, nor power. It was showing them the simple things, gardens, memories, music. The things that made life not just possible, but beautiful. That night, as they sat again by Mikkel's stove on the terrace, the silence was different. It wasn't reverence this time, nor awe. It was the silence of people full to the brim, carrying music still humming in their bones. Naima cradled her mug, watching the shimmer of the nebula. She thought, we are not just explorers anymore, we are participants. This place doesn't want to be studied, it wants to be shared. And though no one said it aloud, each of them felt it. They had been given a seat in the circle of song. And the song was not finished. They might have spent days returning to the garden and the music hall, but the nebula itself seemed to tug them deeper. Every time they walked the crystalline corridors, subtle glimmers appeared along one path, then another, as though the structure was lighting a trail. This time, it led them to a low arch. Unlike the towering entrances of other chambers, this one required them to bow their heads slightly as they entered. Inside, the air shifted at once. It was warmer, softer, carrying a faint fragrance like lavender mixed with rain. The chamber itself was not vast, but intimate, carved into curves that enfolded rather than towered. The walls glowed gently with a diffuse light, no brighter than twilight. Across the floor were alcoves, dozens of them, lined with something like moss, though finer, softer, glowing faintly like embers beneath ash. It's beds, Juno whispered, wonder in her voice. Mikkel stepped forward, kneeling to touch one of the alcoves. His gloved hand sank slightly into the surface, which brightened at the contact, then dimmed to a steady glow. He smiled. Warm, perfectly warm. Elira glanced around slowly, her voice hushed. A place for rest, for dreams. They tried the alcoves one by one, half laughing at the strangeness of lying down in an alien structure. But the moment their bodies touched the moss, laughter faded into sighs. The moss was not just soft. It cradled them, adjusting subtly to their shape, holding them the way water holds a swimmer, buoyant, supported, safe. The warmth spread through them, not hot but steady, like the heat of a hearthstone carried in pockets through a cold night. Naima lay back in her alcove, staring upward. The ceiling was not crystal, but a canopy of dim motes, drifting lazily like stars seen through a foggy window. The longer she looked, the more they seemed to arrange themselves into constellations, patterns familiar yet strange, like memories of a sky she had never seen. Her eyes grew heavy. The dreams came gently, not the chaotic fragments of ordinary sleep, but something guided, woven. Naima found herself standing in a meadow under the nebula's glow. Around her were the same crystalline towers, but alive with figures of light, tall, graceful beings who moved with ease, their gestures slow and welcoming. They did not speak, yet she understood. Their presence was not instruction nor command. It was companionship. She saw them tending the glowing plants, gathering around a crystalline hearth, weaving music in the echoing chamber. She saw children of light chasing motes that darted like fireflies, laughter shimmering through the air like bells. And then she saw herself, her crew, seated among them, sharing tea, singing, resting in alcoves side by side. When she woke, her eyes were damp. She was not the only one. Juno sat up slowly, hands pressed to her face. They showed me a garden, she whispered, but I was in it. Like I belonged there. Arlen rubbed his chest, bewildered. I dreamed I was building with them, shaping the crystal. My hands knew what to do. Tavi laughed softly, though his eyes glistened. I dreamed I was flying, not ships, just me with the motes of light carrying me. It felt like joy itself. Mikkel's voice was quieter. They let me heal with them, not just wounds, sorrows. I felt peace. Elira's hands trembled as she wrote her account. These aren't dreams, they're shared memory. They're giving us pieces of themselves. Naima listened, heart steady but heavy with awe. She had dreamed of belonging, of sitting at a hearth older than time, her crew woven into its story. She realized, with a shiver, that the chamber had not only shown them the past. It had shown them what could be, the continuation of the story, if they chose to stay. When they left the chamber at last, The glow of the alcoves dimmed but did not fade, as though holding their rest in memory. The corridors outside felt brighter, sharper, the nebula light more vivid. Each of them carried a softness in their movements, as though the dreams had followed them back into waking. Juno walked beside Naima, voice tentative. "Do you think they wanted us to see those things, or did we dream them ourselves?" Naima thought carefully before answering. "Maybe both. Maybe they wanted us to see that their lives weren't so different, that we could fit into the same patterns." Illyra, behind them, spoke with quiet certainty. "Not just could, we already do." That evening, back on the terrace, the crew didn't build a fire or light extra lamps. They simply sat in the nebula's glow, close together, each carrying their dreams. And as Naima looked around at her family, Juno sketching absently, Arlen humming softly, Mikkel brewing, Illyra writing, Tavi tossing a mote of crystal between his hands, she thought again of the chamber's alcoves and the way they had been cradled like children at rest. This place is not just memory, she realized. It is care. And though no one said it aloud, each of them felt it. The structure was not simply shelter. It was a home waiting to be shared. By now, the crew had stopped questioning whether the structure was guiding them. Each path glowed faintly, always leading somewhere new, always with the same quiet intention: come, see, belong. So when the corridor split one morning, and one branch shimmered with a golden hue unlike the others, Naima simply nodded, and they followed. The air grew warmer as they walked, tinged with scents that made their stomachs stir, sweetness like ripe fruit, a savory depth that recalled Hearth-baked bread, a brightness like citrus carried on breeze. Juno's eyes widened. "Do you smell that?" Tavi groaned dramatically. "Please tell me we've found the alien kitchen. I can't eat nutrient loaf one more time." Arlen chuckled. "If they've got alien coffee, I'll never leave." Naima only smiled. She felt the same hunger stirring, not just for food, but for what food meant: company, sharing, a circle drawn closer. The chamber opened suddenly, like stepping into the heart of a festival. It was circular, with long, low tables carved seamlessly from the crystalline floor. The tables curved in arcs, meeting at a central platform that glowed faintly, as though waiting to be lit. But it was what lay on the tables that made them stop. Not food as humans knew it, but vessels of light, bowls, platters, pitchers, all shimmering with liquid radiance. Some glowed deep amber, some pale silver, some soft green. The light within them pulsed faintly, like breath. Juno approached the nearest vessel with reverence. She reached out, and the vessel brightened, its surface shifting from opaque to translucent. Inside, she saw not light but substance, something thick, luminous, moving like honey. She glanced at Naima, hesitant. Mikkel scanned it, reading the results with raised brows. Not toxic, nutrient-rich, balanced. In fact, he paused, scanning again. It's nearly identical to the nutrient profiles of what we eat, just cleaner. Cleaner, Tavi asked. Pure, Mikkel clarified. Perfectly tuned. Naima gave a small nod. Try it. Juno dipped a hand tentatively, then drew back with a laugh. It's warm. She licked a drop from her finger and froze. Her eyes widened, then softened, shining with tears. It tastes like home, she whispered. One by one they tried. For Arlen, the amber vessel tasted like rich broth from his childhood on the orbital colonies, simple, hearty, filling. For Tavi, the silver vessel was sharp and bright, like citrus sweets he used to steal from markets as a boy. Illyra sipped from a pale green vessel, and her breath caught. It's my grandmother's stew, she murmured. Exactly, even the way she oversalted it. She laughed softly, tears in her eyes. Mikkel found his cup tasted like the herbal brews he had always made for others. The comfort he gave reflected back to him. Naima drank last. The vessel glowed with deep gold as she touched it. The taste was simple, tea brewed on long winter nights, the taste of her grandmother's hearth, of hands wrapped around a clay mug while snow fell outside. Her throat tightened. She set the cup down gently, as though it were sacred. They did not feast in silence, nor in awe alone. Soon the hall filled with laughter, with the clatter of cups, with stories spilled as freely as the luminous drink. Tavi reenacted his childhood thefts with exaggerated flourishes. Arlen insisted his colony's broths were superior to Earth stews, sparking a playful argument with Elira. Juno glowed, her hands always busy, passing vessels, urging others to try what she had discovered, sketching the shapes of the bowls between sips. Mikkel moved quietly, topping up cups, his smile faint but steady, the satisfaction of a host watching his guests cared for. Naima leaned back, watching her crew as light shimmered on their faces. For the first time in years, she thought not of the weight of command, nor of charts and duty. She thought only, this is family. The hall itself seemed to listen. The vessels never emptied. The glow of the tables brightened when laughter rose, dimmed gently when conversations softened. And above them, on the walls, faint images appeared, figures of light seated at those same tables, sharing vessels of radiance, their gestures warm and open. The builders had sat here long ago, exactly as the crew now sat. Elira pointed upward, her voice trembling. They're showing us we belong in this circle too. Naima nodded slowly. They're telling us the hearth is not complete without us. When they left at last, full and glowing, the golden corridor dimmed behind them, as though the hall had tucked itself to rest after the gathering. On the terrace that night, no one brewed nutrient loaf or tea. They simply sat together, still nourished by what they had been given, still warmed by the memory of the feast. Naima gazed at the nebula and thought, we have been shown garden, memory, song, rest, and table. The shape is clear, a hearth, and though no one said it aloud, each of them felt it. They had not just found a place to explore. They had been welcomed into a family that stretched across stars and time. It was Juno who noticed the new path. While the others debated whether to revisit the music hall or the garden, she lingered in the corridor, eyes fixed on a faint flicker to the left. Not the steady glow of guidance, but something more erratic, like laughter made visible. Over here, she called, her voice bright. They followed, curiosity tugging them onward. The corridor curved and widened, and soon the air shifted. It carried not fragrance, nor the hum of song, but a brightness that felt almost mischievous. The chamber they entered was unlike any before. It was vast, yes, but not solemn or sacred. Its walls shimmered with moving patterns, shapes that darted like fish, tumbled like leaves, spun like children's toys. The floor was not smooth but shifting, patches rising and lowering, forming steps, platforms, slides, and floating everywhere were motes of light, quick and darting, like playful fireflies. Tavi let out a delighted laugh. Oh, this is definitely for games. The motes reacted the instant he reached for one. They zipped away, then returned, circling his head in teasing spirals. He lunged again, missed, stumbled, and the motes burst into bright sparks, giggling in tones like tiny bells. Juno gasped. They're laughing at you, Tavi grinned, chasing them with renewed determination. The motes scattered, then regrouped, darting just out of reach. Arlen stepped onto a raised platform, only for it to sink gently beneath his weight, lowering him to the floor like a slow-moving elevator. He tried another, which lifted him instead, carrying him upward until he laughed in surprise. It's interactive, he said, responsive, like a playground. Soon they were all caught up in it. Juno discovered that sketching shapes in the air with her finger caused motes to copy her lines, glowing trails that bent and twisted until they burst into showers of sparks. Elira touched a wall, and a story unfolded across its surface, moving images of the light beings gathered around a fire, acting out a tale. She gasped softly, then smiled. It's theater. They told stories here. Mikkel, ever cautious, stood back at first, but when one of the motes landed on his shoulder, pulsing warmly, he chuckled despite himself. He lifted his hand, and the mote rolled into his palm, glowing brighter as if proud to have been caught. Naima watched, her crew scattering across the chamber, laughing, calling to one another. She felt the seriousness in her chest loosen, melt. The air itself seemed lighter here, as though gravity had agreed to play along. They experimented for hours. Tavi and Juno invented games of chase with the motes, who gleefully played along, sometimes cheating, sometimes letting themselves be caught. Arlen tested the platforms, finding combinations that made them rise, fall, tilt, or spin. He and Alira eventually used them to act out clumsy, exaggerated reenactments of their first landing, sending the others into fits of laughter. Mikkel discovered that if he hummed low and steady, the motes would gather around him, orbiting in synchronized patterns like planets around a star. "See," he said softly, smiling, "even they like tea-time calm." Naima finally stepped into the play herself, sketching a circle in the air. The motes caught it, spun it into a wheel of light, then rolled it across the chamber until it broke into fragments. She laughed, the sound surprising even her. But amid the joy there were stories too. When Alira pressed her hand to the wall again, a new tale emerged, not solemn but playful. Figures of light acting out pranks, mock battles with harmless sparks, laughter woven into every movement. She whispered as she watched. They valued this, not just survival, not just rest. They built joy into their lives. Naima stood beside her, nodding, because joy is how you remember why survival matters. They left the chamber reluctantly, motes escorting them to the door, chiming farewells like tiny bells. Outside, the corridor felt quieter, steadier, as if the structure itself had laughed with them and now sighed contentedly. Back on the terrace that night, they were still smiling. Juno's sketches glowed with wild motion. Arlen teased Tavi about his clumsy chasing. Mikkel brewed with a hum that made Alira laugh anew. Naima leaned back, gazing at them, her chest warm. The chamber had given them more than play. It had given them permission to be light-hearted again, to be more than explorers weighed down by awe. They gave us laughter, she thought. Even across ages, they wanted us to have that. And though no one said it aloud, each of them felt it. The hearth was not just survival, memory, or music. It was joy, and joy had found them again. The path revealed itself differently this time. Not a glow, not laughter, not fragrance. It was a pull. A soft, steady tug, like the feeling of walking downhill, as though the very shape of the corridors urged them onward. Naima felt it in her bones before she saw it. Every chamber they had entered had carried its own essence, growth, memory, music, rest, food, play, but always peripheral, like spokes around a wheel. Now they were being drawn toward the center. The corridor widened slowly, each curve opening just a little more, until at last they stepped into a chamber vast enough to take their breath away. It was round, perfectly round, and unlike the others, it had no alcoves, no platforms, no vessels. Its walls rose smooth and luminous, curving upward into a dome that shimmered with nebula light. At the very center stood a single structure, a hearth. Not fire, not crystal, but something in between, a bowl-like form carved into the floor, its surface glowing with a steady warmth. From it rose not flame, but light, golden and soft, flickering gently as though alive. Mikkel whispered, reverent, "It's a fire." Arlen shook his head slowly. "Not fire, more than that." Juno stepped closer, eyes wide. "It feels like home." The crew gathered in a circle, instinctively mirroring the shape of the chamber. The light from the hearth did not scorch, did not blaze. It warmed. Each of them felt it sink into their skin, their bones, the ache of long travel, the weight of years. It was not heat alone, it was presence. Naima knelt, placing her hand on the edge of the bowl. The glow brightened faintly, acknowledging her touch. And then slowly, images appeared in the air above the hearth. Not memories this time, not play, something deeper. Figures of light seated in a circle, gathered around this very hearth. Their gestures were calm, intimate, hands clasped, shoulders leaning together. Their forms shimmered as though telling stories, singing, resting. And then the images shifted, showing the crew themselves, sitting at the same hearth, their own movements mirrored in light. Alira gasped softly, notebook clutched to her chest. "It's including us." For a long while no one spoke. The hearth pulsed gently, like breath, holding them in silence that was not empty but full of memory, belonging, continuity. At last Mikkel said what they were all thinking. This place wasn't built to be visited. It was built to be lived in, to be shared. Naima nodded, voice steady though her heart swelled. "It's not just a record, it's an invitation." Juno looked around the circle, her eyes shining. "An invitation to what?" Arlen smiled faintly, gaze fixed on the light. "To join the hearth, to carry it forward." They stayed for hours, perhaps longer. Time seemed to fold here, the hearthlight steady, patient. They spoke little, yet each word felt heavier, truer. Juno shared a story of her childhood garden, how she used to build tiny houses for insects and pretend they had their own cities. Tavi boasted, half serious, that if the motes had let him fly again, he would have stayed in the chamber of play forever. Illyra read aloud a passage she had written about the builders, about the way joy and rest and music formed the fabric of life as surely as stone or water. Arlen whistled a tune, soft and simple, which the chamber caught and deepened, folding into the steady pulse of the hearth. Mikkel brewed tea, of course, and when he poured, the steam curled upward into the hearthlight, shimmering as though accepted as an offering. And Naima simply listened, to her crew, to the hearth, to the quiet thrum of belonging. When they finally rose, the hearth dimmed but did not extinguish. It pulsed once more, as if in farewell or in promise. As they stepped back into the corridor, Juno whispered, almost afraid to break the spell, "We found the center." Naima looked back once at the glow fading behind them. "No," she said softly, "the center found us." That night on the terrace, they did not speak much. They sat shoulder to shoulder, mugs warm in their hands, nebula light stretching across the stars. And though no one said it aloud, each of them felt it. The journey had changed. They were not explorers at the edge of something vast. They were keepers of a hearth older than stars.